This is a typical small battery farm, and this video is all about telling you the truth about them. In order to demonstrate the points I want to make, I'm going to take an example of a proposed battery farm which is now seeking planning permission just outside Swansea in South Wales, the UK. The effect is to turn some land alongside the M4 motorway just outside Swansea into something like this. But the lessons from this apply to all battery farms everywhere. The first characteristic we're going to look at is size. How good are battery farms at doing what they claim and backing up wind and solar, intermittent wind and solar? So we can have occasions in the UK when the wind is so negligible it doesn't basically supply electricity for 9 days and longer. So how good is a battery storage facility at backing that up? And that brings us to the very first question. How much energy do we need to back up wind? Well, this is the demand on the energy system in the UK on January the 8th. That's when we came very, very close to a blackout. That's January the 8th, 2025. So if you look at this, the level went from about 30 gigawatts being supplied to around about 47, 48 gigawatts being supplied here. So, that's how much energy we're consuming typically on a winter's day, if you like. Now, going to the energy dashboard for that day, it was a day of infamy, really, because we really had no reserves left. And so the operator of the grid wouldn't actually reveal the final figures. They were hiding them. They live in secrecy now. They're not open. Anyway, look at that day there. Now, we've got wind at about 3.5 gigawatts at that point there. And let's go up and have a look at solar. Well, solar is nothing, of course. And then we've got a lot of gas at that point. We were really stretching it. And the total demand was over 47, almost 48 gigawatts. So that's what was happening. You can see where energy is coming from. Even if you go down that chart further, you can see it's mainly gas. And as you can see here, the imports are almost double the amount of wind. So wind is meant to be giving us energy security, but as you can see, it's nearly all gas and imports. Yeah, no solar and next to no wind. And this is the problem. And if you look further along that graph here, you will see that the wind was very low all the way. So we had long periods, days, without very much wind. And in order to back up that, you need a lot of energy. So now I'm not going to look at extremes. I'm not going to look at periods of wind drought. I'm going to look at just today when I'm making this video. What is the energy dashboard saying today? And anyone can look this up. energydashboard.co.uk gives you this graph. So there we are. Let's just look at just today. And I've taken the energy dashboard for today, and you can see at this point here the wind is very low, the solar's non-existent, and it's all being taken up by the gas and the imports here, and the imports are quite impressive. If we wanted to be independent, of course, we'd have to replace those, but I'll just take the gas. How much gas that day? Well, it goes from about 21 gigawatt at the rate of 21 gigawatts up to about 43 gigawatts. So you see, we're actually doing about 22 gigawatts of gas. So the next question is, so how much energy is stored in these battery farms? And by example, we're going to take the new battery farm proposed at Swansea. And that farm stores 200 megawatt hours. And its maximum output is 100 megawatts, so it could do that for 2 hours. That's making some extreme assumptions that we'll come to. So looking back at just literally today's energy graph, how long would that last? Well, 100 megawatts would supply 220th. That's 0.0045% of the power needed. So you'd need 220 such farms to meet that shortfall. But they would only last for 2 hours. In fact, all the energy in one farm like this would just power the grid for about a second or so. And using all the life of the battery, 100% of it, as I've assumed, would damage the battery and give it a very short life. So the figures are actually much worse than I've portrayed here. But the problem, of course, is we have not taken anyway an extreme situation. And what happens to all these blue bits when gas is actually having to fill in? And what happens if that following night and the nights after, and they can happen for weeks on end, there isn't enough wind to recharge the battery? So it is clear from this that batteries can only be used for a matter of seconds as backup storage. They really do not play any real role in backing up the grid. They can take very short peaks for very limited amount of time indeed, and you'd need hundreds and hundreds of farms like this to be effective at all. So for storage, backup storage, the question comes down to how long do we have to back up for? Well, I've often in the past in many of my videos used the example of the 2018 time, when for 9 days we had less than 1% of the normal wind. And even if you have triple the amount of wind, 3 times 0 is still 0. So there are times like 9 days, but 9 days is by no means the worst. Now that 9-day period, I did a video on it, and the link's below, and it's when the wind stops, and that came out with a figure of 7,200 gigawatt hours of storage needed. To back up and replace the wind drop in that period. But if we are actually going to expand the plan, as Ed Miliband claims, to expand the electricity grid, we could need as much as 30,000 gigawatt hours of storage. And of course, there have been studies done on wind droughts. Now, a wind drought is when the wind's below about 10 miles an hour and you can't generate any power, or when it's maybe too windy in a storm and you can't generate any power. So when you can't generate power, that's defined as a wind drought. Now, I'm quoting from that research paper. These results suggest that the March 2021 wind drought, with a duration of 11 days, and an energetic deficit of 1 terawatt hour, that's 1,000 gigawatt hours by the way, with respect to demand net wind, was not a particularly rare event. In fact, a wind drought with a comparable duration and severity occurred in December of the same year, so twice in 1 year, with 11-day period of a wind drought. In light of this, it is clear that the growing reliance on wind energy necessitates the development of strategies to mitigate the impacts of these wind droughts on the electricity system. Well, you can say that again, because if we study the 11 days of wind drought, we just haven't got the energy. At the moment we back up with gas, but in future they're saying only 5% will come from gas. And it really is, gas is the only backup to this. All these storage ideas are meaningless. Gas is the only viable backup to intermittent energy from wind and solar, period. And another quote from the same report. The longest drought in the 72-year record, which persisted for 26 days, expected to occur once every 100 years. So we've got periods like just 1 or 2 or 3 days without wind, absolutely regular. We've got periods like 9 days occasionally. We've got periods like 18 days, 15 days, every few years really. And so, these periods are really a problem, because we're talking here of just incredible amounts of energy being missed, measured in the terawatt hours, not the gigawatt hours. And a terawatt's 1,000 gigawatts, and it makes the battery system look like nothing. It's the hair on a camel's back compared to the size of the requirement. In another study called the Variability in North Sea Wind Energy and Potential for Prolonged Winter Drought, this is a quote. We find that a maximum of 5 weeks of non-consecutive wind drought is possible over the 13-week winter season. That's 5 weeks out of 13 in drought in the winter season is very possible. Now, what's interesting is knowing that wind always gets a priority in our energy system, because we have to pay for it even if we don't use it. Gas is used to fill around. Last year in 2024, around 28% of the country's power came from gas, which translates to roughly 88 terawatt hours. This is an enormous amount of energy, and that would have to be replaced with the balancing in the grid. Now, as we increase wind, that would get less, I accept that, but you're still into very long periods, because when there's no wind, when there's a wind drought, even trebling the wind doesn't give you any more. It's as simple as that. I mean, it's so little that you get that you have to really cope with a zero wind situation. And even if a duration of hours, the batteries can't cope with, because if it goes on for 10 days, they've exhausted themselves in the first couple of hours, even if you've got 220 of those farms. So, and one farm has no effect whatsoever. Basically, it is wrong to claim that batteries are used to balance the wind power grid, to balance the intermittent energy from wind. That is simply not true. But what do the people in that battery industry claim? Well, here's one battery farm developer that's developing battery farms around England and Wales. Let's see what he has to say. Well, Tom Fernan, founder and chief executive of Statera, one of the UK's leading battery developers, a battery-powered Britain makes huge sense to him. Quote, "These technologies can store energy at scale, not just for hours, but across days," says Vernon. "This capability is essential for maintaining energy security, reducing the UK's reliance on natural gas, and ensuring we are prepared for future cold snaps and Duncan flouts, as and when they occur." He goes on to say, Vernon believes that once Britain has hit Miliband's target of at least 25 gigawatts of battery capacity, there'll be times, especially on cold, windless winter evenings, when batteries provide up to 2/3 of the UK's power. Also, there we are. Let's just take a rational look at this. This man here, whose business is selling battery power, is claiming that 25 gigawatts is fantastic. He doesn't actually. 25 gigawatts is a rate of electricity, so I'm assuming he means 25 gigawatt hours. That would, on the day example we've taken today, I've just taken randomly that chart from, the energy curves, and it's 22 gigawatts we were trying to make up. So the whole of the UK big plan would last an hour. And he says it can take up 2/3 of the supply of the grid. Yeah, for an hour maybe. But in actual fact, there's 24 hours in a day. And once you've taken that up, once that battery's supplied all that, which is costing millions and millions, by the way, incredible amounts. Once that's taken up, there's no replenishment because we've got 9, 10, 15 days without wind. So they can't replenish the energy. So it's gone. So in terms of energy storage, we're looking at, on the 9-day example I use, with 7,200 gigawatt hours, and they're supplying 25 out of 7,200. Or in the future, if you actually take that forward to what they plan, you'd need 30,000 gigawatt hours of backup. And you've got, 25, 26? Dinorwic, it's exactly the same as pump storage. It's exactly the same as a battery, because that's all that is a battery in terms of water up a hill. And that is Dinorwic, our biggest, is 9.1 gigawatt hours. Yeah. And we need 30,000 or 7,200, depending on which scenario you take, right? All they can do is take the little tiny peaks out. When you get a little peak, like a sports event, so if a cup final's on and everyone stands half time, the power goes up. They can cope with that for short term. So battery storage is simply short term stuff. That's all it is, nothing else. But there's a bigger role for batteries, and the real reason for batteries, and what a lot of them contract for, the battery farms, is grid stabilization, which is stabilizing the frequency, because the wind and solar give very unstable power, and they have to be synchronized to the 50 hertz cycle rate. And that frequency they act just like a flywheel. And we're planning to build apparently 100 flywheels to do the same thing. The reason is, in the old days when we had coal and normal stuff coming through, there were the big generators with huge flywheels on the end that kept the energy coming out very stable. And they are now going as we're replacing with wind. So we need the flywheels or the battery farms to help stabilize. All these are extra costs. Another thing you could use wind batteries for is storing, taking cheap electricity at night from some supplier and selling it in the day a little bit more. You can do that as well. But to pretend that in any way what's being represented by this man is wrong. It's simply wrong. And batteries are just an extra additional cost. To give you some idea, both Brian Catt and I came up individually with a figure to supply current rates, the battery backup to the UK grid would cost £3.5 trillion. But if you put that battery demand into the world market, the price would rise considerably because they really can't supply it. There's all sorts of problems, and you'd have to replace that every 10 years. I've also assumed they can use all the power. They can't, because if you drain batteries, if you take an electric car down to zero each time, you're going to ruin the battery. Normally you take it down to 20% and you only go and charge up to 80%. So there's a range of about 60% you tend to use most of the time. Yeah, it can be good for it to take it occasionally to 100%, but that's all. So there's all sorts of issues here. So what I've tried to do in this video is simplify to you why battery farms are not what they claim to be. And they're being misled if you think you're balancing the intermittent grid with them. They don't, except for seconds. They don't do it. Now, I cannot leave the subject of battery farms without mentioning the risk of fires. When a battery farm, and there's a tendency to catch fire, and when they do catch fire, they spew off huge amounts of toxic fumes. The biggest battery farm in the world is in California in the States, and that one has caught fire recently, as we all know, I think, and is spewing out toxic fumes. And the reason they're so difficult to put out is because the batteries supply their own oxygen, so you can't just blanket them because they don't need the air to burn. And it's been burning obviously for days, that one, and they couldn't do anything about it. But it's been spewing out these toxic fumes, and it has damaged people. And there's now a class action in America on that because there's been medical examinations picking up various chemicals in people, etc. So to have these battery farms alongside roads and even near to big cities like Swansea can be a real problem. You can have the whole, if it takes off, you'd have the whole of Swansea covered. And here we in Swansea, we have, like in almost every council, we have people who don't understand all this. They think there's a climate emergency, which they can't even define. They're following like sheep or all the misinformation they're fed. And what I would like to do is ask them, are they aware of the fact that there's no real balancing of the grid, that the battery farm they're proposing wouldn't support the grid for more than a second or two, that it doesn't do what people are claiming, and the risks are there. And have they looked into the risk of the fire? Because it isn't just the isolated one here. And so that people ought to be aware of this risk. And before they give final approval, and at the moment they're very much approving it, I would ask them to watch this video. And then for the people in the Swansea area, or anyone else for that matter, to actually respond to the council to maybe make their objections to it. So I'm going to list now all the contact details, which are public. I'm not divulging any secret stuff of the councillors, so that people can email them and tell them what they think of the proposals and what the benefits are compared to the risks. And basically, all the battery farming is a leech of cost onto your energy system caused by intermittent energy, mainly to stabilize the frequency, as I've said. That's what it's really for. And it's just extra costs all the time. And that's why your bills are going up continuously and will continue to rise. And even at Miliband now, you know, it is sort of accepting you're not going to get cheaper electricity, even though he's been saying this all the time. At times he's been saying 9 times cheaper. And yeah, here we are with the most expensive electricity to industry and consumers in the world. So, you know, they are facts. And I would ask Swansea Council to wake up on this and look at this. So if you're going to want to help, anyone can write to them and point out what they think of this proposal near Swansea, you know, which is really nothing as regards dealing with intermittent energy, except the frequency stabilization, which is purely an extra cost that wasn't there before. So there we are. Thank you for watching this video. And what comes now is just a list of email addresses, and it's in the description below. Alongside the research papers I quoted, the links to those is in the description below, so you can check out what I've been saying is true. And as always, I welcome comments, although I try to answer every comment that needs answering. But I am struggling now because of the numbers that are coming in, all the different videos, but I'll do my best. Again, this is an unscripted video, as I always do them, and I'm just doing them always as if I'm just sitting in your lounge talking to you. So I hope you enjoy them, and thank you for watching.
Catching promise that there would be £300 off people's energy bills. We now learn from yesterday gas and electricity bills have gone up again, an increase of £21 per annum in a typical house, in a typical household. So when you made that promise, were you disingenuous or naive?
No, I was correct.
Well, I'm sorry, what don't you understand, sir? They've gone up by 21 quid.
Average. We said that by 2030 they'd be up to £300 off bills. And here's the point, Nick, and this is a real worry for lots of people. What is happening is that fossil fuel prices are rising to do with geopolitical events. There's 60%, the UK price, wholesale market price is 60% higher than it was a year ago. That is leading to upward pressure on energy bills. There is only one answer to this, Nick, which is clean homegrown power that we control.
I'm not sure whether our energy Mr. Miliband even understands the difference between gigawatt hours and gigawatts. Because gigawatt hours, of course, is an amount of energy and gigawatt is a rate of energy. Right. However, I'll read out what he's claiming. Miliband's Clean Power 2030 auction plan aims to dramatically expand this, calling for 29 to 35 gigawatts across the battery storage, consumer-led flexibility and interconnection capacity. More than 1,800 grid-scale battery storage projects are now being pushed through planning, according to Renewable UK, and they're going to push them through in the end strategically, regardless of what the local wishes are. And the chances of some of these catching fire is pretty high when you've got 1,800 of them. This is total madness. And of course, it is totally ruining our countryside. It's turning it from this into this.